Dice, yeah, ay, ay. Every now and then, you meet someone whose life story sounds like a movie. Part spiritual awakening, part psychological mystery, part wait, what? And somehow all of it is true. Today's guest, author and retreat facilitator Sean Blackwell, is one of those rare people. Before Sean ever wrote a book, before he ever led retreats, he was just a frustrated guy in his 20s trying to figure out what the hell to do with his life. One self help course, one meditation, and one buried scuba diving trauma later, he found himself seeing the world in a way that didn't fit any textbook definition of mental illness, and definitely didn't fit the hospital he suddenly woke up in. His senses sharpened, his reality shifted, his career tripled in 3 years, and instead of falling apart, life somehow got better. But the question that followed him for years was that crisis a breakdown or a breakthrough? In this episode, we explore that question lightly, openly, and humanly. We talk spiritual emergencies, bipolar labels, ego shifts, meditation, synchronicities, and what happens when your mind cracks open in a way the world doesn't know how to understand. This isn't a dark episode, it's an eye-opener. It's a perspective shifter. It's the kind of conversation that leaves you curious about yourself in the best possible way. Welcome to the FYI Iron Damage podcast, where the healed, healing, and others share their wisdom. Meet Logan, the strong-minded little elephant who learns that bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about believing in yourself even when you're scared. In this beautifully illustrated story, friends follow Logan through a colorful jungle as he learns to calm his worries, take deep breaths, and remind himself, I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. It's a story that helps kids, and maybe a few grown-ups too, find courage, mindfulness, and strength in their hearts. Logan, the strong-minded little elephant, by me, Oscar Luna. Available now at all major retailers and my publisher's bookstore, Milton and Hugo. Because it's up to every parent to show that their child deserves to know that strength starts from within. Sean, you are an author and retreat facilitator, but not everyone knows the person you were before your first bipolar crisis. How would you describe your life and your world leading up to that episode?
Leading up to that episode, frustrated. I was really struggling with my career. And even when I went into university, I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. I took a Bachelor of Commerce courses thinking, well, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I hated it. And the only thing I was interested in university was religion. And I started studying religion. But I was like, well, what the hell am I going to do with religion? Studying religion is going to take me nowhere. But it was the only thing that really drew me in. And I got a degree in sociology and economics from that Bachelor of Commerce sort of direction. And then I came out and I worked in advertising, and I started out in a media department, and it was just 4 years of nonstop exasperated frustration. I took a course called the Landmark Forum, and it was a very intensive self-help course because I was frustrated in my career, right? And that's what sent me into a spiritual crisis, and that's where my story sort of starts when I was 30 years old in 1996.
Yeah, a lot of men in their 30s are really gearing up for their career. That's a very stressful point in time for them.
Yeah, and if it's not happening, you're getting into 27, 28, 29, and you're going nowhere, despite having, University of Toronto is the best university in Canada. It's like, what the hell are you supposed to do,
Exactly.
It was really tough. Yeah.
When you look back on your hospitalization in the 90s, what do you see now that you couldn't have possibly have seen at the time?
Everything.
Please break it down for us.
Everything. What does everything look like? That hospitalization. And first, for me, I didn't even know what anything to do with bipolar disorder was. I had a spiritual breakthrough that I couldn't handle. It was on this self-help course, and on that course, we were in an intensive meditation that brought up trauma from a scuba diving accident. And when I saw, in my vision, I during the meditation, I saw my depth gauges, and it reminded me of when I was shooting to the surface because I had lost my weight belt. And I was shooting to the surface, wondering if I was going to actually make it to the surface of the ocean before I died, you know. And that feeling, the blocked trauma from that moment all surfaced on this course. And then after that, my reality shifted permanently because all of my senses sharpened. I could see detail in curtains that I couldn't see before. My sense of smell was sharper. I had a feeling of almost all knowingness, like I finally knew things that I didn't know before. There was a sense of oneness and a general feeling of like, wow, this is incredible. And after 5 days of being in this state, I finally realized that, wow, this is what happens to people when they die. And then I thought, oh, I'm on the course. And I thought, oh, I died during that scuba diving accident. And all of this is some sort of a in-between world, like a purgatory, where I'm being tested by God to see if I'm worth getting into heaven or nirvana or whatever's on the other side. And so from that place, I went into an adjacent ballroom, which was the next door room, and took off all my clothes because I'm going to meet God. And my conception of God was very loose. I wasn't Christian at the time, just so you know, or anything. I was kind of agnostic. And one thing led to another. Next thing you know, the police are there. They're handcuffing me and putting me in a stretcher, taking me to the psychiatric hospital. And at the hospital, I still think we were somehow in a spaceship traveling to another dimension like heaven or something. But then they gave me a forced injection, which was really kind of traumatizing. It was very aggressive. And when I woke up a few days later, I knew that somehow what I was thinking was kind of off. And I told them I thought I had PTSD related to my scuba diving accident. But then I got released and I went home. But I told my parents, I said, look, I had a spiritual experience. I had something positive happen to me. I don't know what a mental illness is, but that's not what I had. And I spent the next few months integrating, like just being at home, staying to myself, had a very helpful friend who was able to sort of listen to me and kind of identified with my experience. And when I finally got back to work 4 months later, maybe 5 months later, everything got better. I got a better job in advertising. And then over the next 3 years, my salary tripled. I eventually left Toronto and went to work. Eventually, I was working in Las Vegas on advertising strategy for the Luxor Hotel, Excalibur, and Circus. That became like the next move, you know. And this was all like so much better than my career was before, right? And it all came from having this crisis, you know.
Right.
Now, the big shift that happened for me in that crisis was when I got out of the hospital, I still didn't know what was the difference between reality and dreaming. Because while I was in psychosis, I was dreaming. Okay. In a sense, it felt like I was in a dream, you know, like you're an actor in my world, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I never really went back to the old way of seeing the world. I actually just got kind of used to the fact that the world has a kind of a dreamlike quality to it. And that when you live from the heart, things work out a lot better than trying to figure everything out with your brain, trying to rationally plan everything. That if you just come from the heart, incredible synchronistic material starts to come together. And that there is this dream aspect to living. You just kind of got to get used to it. You know, you got to get used to it. And that led into, you know, what I do today, you know, so I put it like that.
Okay. So, and was that just at that moment where you kind of see the world in a different lens, or you're carrying that, you know, for good and you see it that way now, or it was just at that moment when you had that, let's say, I think you said awakening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can have your good days and bad days, highs and lows, but that was a permanent shift for me. That was a permanent shift. It was kind of like the moment you kind of realize we're in the Matrix, you know, that kind of thing. Except if you watch the Matrix movies, which came out just a few years after that, they kind of have us like we're actually in these pods, you know, we're living this illusion. We're in these pods. We're going to be eaten by aliens, you know, this kind of thing. I don't see it as a malevolent thing. I actually see it as a beautiful thing. I think life is a beautiful thing, and that the Matrix is a place that we're learning in to grow in our development, you know. So I see everybody as having a soul or a spirit, regardless of your belief system or your religion. And you're moving through parallel universes to a certain degree. You're moving through realities depending on the capacity you've got to take on. A lot like a video game. It's like, hey, you just nailed level 5. Okay, here comes that level 6, motherfucker. Let's see what you can do with that. I think life kind of works like that. It's like, okay, great, you've passed this test. Now here comes the next, and good luck with it.
It's kind of like walking around and the veil is there, you kind of see it moving, and it's like, like, okay, I know there's something a little bit more to the reality than what it is, than what somebody would
Yeah.
normally see it.
Yeah. Like if you hear, for example, 3 different people or 3 different sources giving you the same information about something you've been thinking about inadvertently, like when I started to do podcasts, I had from 3 different places people saying, well, you plant the seeds now and they'll come and grow later, right? And that came up from 2 different people and from something I read in the news or something like that about planting seeds that will grow later. And it was like, this is all happened in the same week. And so you're like, okay, well, that's unusual, right?
Something's telling me something. Yeah.
Yeah. Listen to that.
Yeah. At what point did you begin to suspect that psychiatric labeled bipolar disorder might be a form of spiritual emergency or awakening and not just a malfunctioning brain?
Right. Well, we'll start with this concept of spiritual emergency, which might be new to people. And what happened was I knew I had a spiritual experience, even though it was difficult. And a year after being in the hospital, I found the work of Dr. Stanislav Grof. He's a Czech psychiatrist. And he had written books where he talked about this idea of a spiritual emergency, which is something that can look like an acute psychosis that would get labeled schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, but it can actually be good for you if you work through that process. And when I read his book, I was like, well, this is what happened to me. I had a spiritual emergency. I had all the criteria. And so for me, spiritual emergency was way apart from mental illness. It was completely different. It was a good thing, right? And that's how I framed what happened to me. I never even thought about that I had a mental illness. I thought the doctors were just wrong, But then 10 years later, and 7, by this point, my whole life is different. I'm living in Brazil. I have a Brazilian wife, Ligia, and we're working as English teachers, freelance English teachers. I'm out of advertising, which is much better for me, being a freelance English teacher. I love doing it. And we got a call from her family, and her younger niece, Anna, was going through a process. And when I was hearing what was going on with her, I was like, well, this doesn't sound like mental illness. This sounds like what happened to me. And we went up to work with her a little bit and be supportive. And she was already medicated. And she did recover quite nicely with our support. Even the doctors recognized that. But they still medicated her. And I was like, okay, so what's the difference between what's happening with her and this thing that I went through? So she's being medicated for the next few months, and I learned later medicated for life, and I had a breakthrough. So what's the difference? And I went online and I really started to do some deep research with that, looking at pioneering psychologists from the 1970s, but also talking to people on YouTube, telling them my story and saying, look, what do you think? Am I bipolar or waking up? I knew I wasn't bipolar. I knew I'd woken up. But the feedback I got was people saying, man, I had an experience very similar to yours, and I'm medicated for life. And that's where I started to realize that there was this gray area between these very benevolent spiritual experiences that can happen to people and these things that are being called mental illness, bipolar disorder. As I'm getting prepared to go back to my wife's niece's family, so Anna's family, one of the things I had learned is that there were some pioneering psychiatrists who saw psychosis as an intended reorganization of the psyche, and that if you could just support it without meds, that people can come through. There was something called the Soteria House method from the Soteria Clinic in the 80s, and they had just supported people and reported an 85% success rate. So instead of chaining them to a bed in a hospital and medicating them, they were just there in an empathetic way, and they had these great results. And so I wanted to go back to the family, and I said, look, how about, I was preparing to tell them, let's take her off the meds. If she goes into psychosis, let's support her through it. But as I was preparing for that meeting, and I'd studied about 5 or 6 books at that point, read a lot of comments on YouTube, I thought we could do this. Her sister, her older sister, Eliana, came back from Europe and went into crisis as well. So we're talking about 2 sisters going into their first episode of acute psychosis, both being labeled bipolar, and the episodes happened 4 months apart. But instead of going to the psychiatrist, Eliana came to us directly, and we used the Soteria method of just being with her as opposed to doing something to her. And she came through her first episode a little wobbly, but she made it through. And after 5 days, we finally returned her to her parents. We didn't tell her parents we even had her. Then there was a second episode, but then at the third episode, the family had agreed that we would support her again. And after that third episode, this one summer in 2007, she was able to return to university, free of medication, finish with honors, got a great job, went on to do her master's degree in Paris, So being able to work her through just after 4 months of study and based on my experience was a huge victory for us. From there, I said, well, this is my life mission. I've got to show people that there is a spiritual dimension to bipolar disorder that is not being seen. And actually, this spiritual dimension is what I believe is where pretty much most of the diagnoses in the DSM, if not all, are rooted in an inherent spiritual dimension that you could call a bioenergetic system or a chakra system, that it's all happening in a level of our being that science doesn't acknowledge,
And I would kind of pivot to say, like, you said you're basically there for them. And so in what way on how to get them through an episode, and you just said just be empathetic with them, what comes up and how would that go about? Because if somebody who is, let's say, a parent who has a child who's going through an episode and they don't know what to do, so walk us through how you guys were actually there for those sisters to get them through their episode.
All right. Now, the first thing to mention is that this intended reorganization of the psyche and supporting this experience seems to work only in the first couple of episodes. After that, it becomes like a broken record. It gets a lot tougher. And that's why I created a retreat process. And that's a little bit different. Okay. But in terms of supporting people through an episode, think about the way a parent's going to react if their son comes home and says he's Jesus and he wants all the family money so that he can start a church down the street. They are going to freak out. They're just going to freak out. And they're probably going to get somehow aggressive with their child in some capacity. They're going to take them to the doctor right away. They're going to be pathologized. This isn't something, we can accept. They're going to try and talk sense into them. Everything is going to be about trying to manipulate this person back into reality. And that doesn't work. That doesn't work. It doesn't give people what I would consider a safe space. Now, what's a safe space? It's a quiet environment where the people who are around are prepared to do a lot of listening and have a lot of patience. They need to give the person 24-hour support, because often they don't sleep. So you might have to, for example, take shifts with people. Other people come in and you just keep the stimulus low. Do you want something to eat? Do you want to do some art? You want to take a walk? Simple stuff, but maintaining the relationship, not getting hierarchical on them. It's like you're feeling them. For example, when I was in the ballroom, I had taken my clothes off and I'm sitting there on the floor wondering what to do. What would have been great is if someone came to me and said, hey, how are you? Look, I see you're going through something special. Can I get you anything? Can I get you a blanket? Can I get you a pillow? Then, okay, great. Now I've got my blanket. I got my pillow. I lay down. They put their hand on my shoulder. I say, can you put your hand on my shoulder? Yeah, they got my hand on my shoulder. This is the kind of presence that we want to bring, because when someone's in psychosis, they can feel how you're coming at them. And if you're coming in a fearful way, it's kind of like a wild animal. If you come at them with fear, then they're going to react with fear. But if you come with love, I don't know if you've seen these YouTube videos of this one guy with this pink guitar and he's singing to these animals, and all the animals come up and they touch him and kiss his guitar and everything. The reaction is really incredible. Some of them are wild animals too, rhinoceroses and rhinoceri and giraffes, and the kind of animal you don't think is affectionate. And they all come to this guy. We can feel when the love is present. And if a person in psychosis feel they can relax into this healing process. But like I said, first break, second break, it can happen. After that, it gets tougher. And that's where my work actually started going with my book, Bipolar Awakenings. Whoa, can I get it in there?
You got it.
Yeah, the quest to heal bipolar disorder, But so working with my nieces was like the first step going in that direction. Started in 18-year Jersey.
Is it to prevent episodes or teach them more to handle it on their own when they feel one coming up?
Well, the idea of my work, and this goes right back to the first days of working with people voluntarily, is that the disorder isn't caused by a genetic issue, and there's actually no scientific evidence for that, which a lot of people don't know, but it's rooted in trauma. And so by allowing people to work through whatever energies spontaneously arise, particularly trauma related, but it could be other things, but definitely trauma related in a lot of situations, then the person's healing their disorder. So the idea is that you're going to put bipolar disorder or whatever diagnosis you have behind you. It's going to be a thing of the past. And you're going to be a very different person. You're going to be more natural, more authentic, more real, more open, more spontaneous, more peaceful. But you got to do the work first. And that's the one thing people don't want to do.
Absolutely. Hopefully if they're going through that, and I hope they're not, that's one thing with anything, you got to put in the work. If you don't put out the effort, you're not going to reap the reward, or at least say calm state of mind, which is what everybody wants. And you touched on it, but let's say with the Kundalini, if I pronounce that correctly.
Right. That's good.
And thank you. And chakras can sound abstract or woo-woo to people, and I figured out,
Sure.
I found out what that was through someone who I interviewed from, I don't know if it was like, is that East Coast slang or anything like that? But I like it, little woo-woo. How do you translate those concepts in a way that a psychiatrist, therapist, or family member could engage with?
I mean, you can use a little bit of Western language, right? I call it a bioenergetic system, but it aligns pretty much with what they've known through reports from Indian yogis for centuries, which is there's a kind of a chakra system there. And that word Kundalini comes from the East, and it's your life force. So you could say it's your life force going up against blockages in your bioenergetic system. Some might lean into the term central nervous system because it sounds more biological, but it's closer to spirit than that. But there is this assumption that there's a soul system. And if people can't handle that, for example, if they're atheists, who really an atheist doesn't believe we have a soul, right? Or if you're a devoutly religious person who believes that the only way to connect with spirit is through their specific religion and that the other religions are wrong. Those kind of people, it doesn't matter what I tell them, they're not going to be able to relate to the work. They're just not going to be able to.
Because we know a friend, and I've did it before. She does the sound bowls, and I forgot what that is. It's a where they do the chakras, they do a reading, and why can I think of the name? Well, anyway, she does that where she, I guess, kind of does the healing. Maybe you know what it is. What is that?
You're talking about sound healing or like sound bath?
No, they do the sound bowls, the sound bath, but then they analyze your chakras. What the hell is that? What she does?
Sounds like you described it. They're analyzing your chakras.
Yes, but it has a name to it. Anyway, but no, I've done that before, and it's so like I'm open to it and understanding, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to speak with you. And it's a different experience because like they can read the energy and kind of help talk you through on what they see, even if you approach it skeptically. And I think we're at a point now where it's like you can't ignore all these other facets that some people might think is like, oh, that's kind of hokey. What are you talking about? We got to be rooted supremely in a lot of the things that we're studying, which they can't really prove. So it's like, what am I trying to get to though? But it's kind of like the merging of, or at least the understanding of both sides with the psychiatry and then the spirituality and the things that you're trying to enlighten other people to see that, hey, there's more to this and to heal.
Well, one thing that's really important, and you're kind of nudging into this topic, which I kind of like to talk about a little bit, is there's two kinds of truth. Objective truth, which is scientific facts, things that can be measured, like you and I are on a podcast right now. We're having a conversation. I'm in Santos. You're in New York. That's a fact. Anybody who wants to come along and say, no, Oscar's in Los Angeles or Sean, he's in Canada, they're wrong. The facts are the facts, and that's it. But on the other hand, subjective truths are like your own personal feelings for a situation, your opinions. Is this a good podcast or is it a waste of time? That's entirely subjective. Your feelings, how you feel about your family or your mother, your father. These are subjective feelings. And when it comes to working with people in non-ordinary states of consciousness, like when they go into psychosis or they've got bipolar disorder and stuff, both sides of that need to be respected. You need to understand when you're dealing with the objective truths that science does have a handle on and the subjective truths which they don't have a handle on. And it's not really their jurisdiction. It's like it's just not their territory. And until now, they've been treating, like from the medical side, science has been treating itself like it has the entire territory, but it doesn't, because they can't measure emotions. They can't measure feelings or spirit.
Received. You facilitated years of bipolar breathwork retreats. Beyond symptom relief, what deeper changes have you seen in people's sense of self or life purpose?
Okay. I think maybe I should explain a little bit about the bipolar breathwork before I get into that.
Sure, go right ahead.
No?
Yeah.
Yeah, just so people know, when they hear breathwork, there's a wide variety of breathwork techniques. I'm a certified holotropic breathwork facilitator, and bipolar breathwork comes out of that, okay? But holotropic breathwork, to start, it's a very formatted thing. It's a 3-hour session. People laying on yoga mats, wearing sweat clothes and stuff like that. They've got a trained facilitator in the room that knows how to be present to somebody who's going into an extreme state. And powerful music is played. It starts with powerful drumming, and then it goes into more relaxing music later on. The breathing doesn't really matter that much. The person's encouraged to breathe in their own style, no particular technique, but it's aggressive breathing. Now, what's the breathing doing? Just like a surfer. Before the surfer can go out and surf, they need to swim. Then once they go out and meet the waves, they swim a little bit, then they get up and they surf that wave and they're not swimming anymore. When you're doing breath work, the aggressive breathing is opening up your ego a little bit. It's starting to bring up waves of the unconscious. That's what you're kind of swimming out there for with the aggressive breathing. But then once you're in contact with a particular feeling or a vision or a physical sensation that is beyond your own ego, at that point you can forget about the breathing and you just express. And that means physical movement on the mat, vocalization, and just bringing up whatever primal sensation needs to come. And it takes a little practice because we're all used to sort of being civilized and polite and not acting like a fool or being cool, these kind of things. And then we're in this space where to be vulnerable, you just have to show yourself in a raw way and surrender. So I took that holotropic breath work and brought it into a more modified form for people with bipolar disorder, because in a typical group setting, it's not a safe container for someone with deeper disorders. So I put them into a private setting where they supply the room. It could be their house. It could be a country house, which is even better. And it's a safe space. There's no objects in the room or anything like that. And then they have a voluntary supporter with them as well. This all keeps the price down, right? Or the cost down. And then they go into their breathing, right? And then certain things come up. And one of the first things that happens is they start to feel their bioenergetic system get reconnected. A lot of hot and cold energies coming up and down, the Kundalini energies, particularly hot energies. Things get connected. It's not so emotional. But then as the sessions continue, sometimes a lot of stress gets released, that we're all carrying a lot more stress than you imagine. And then some emotional content starts to surface. So in the beginning, it can also often be pleasant. It can kind of remind you of your essence. It's a feel-good experience sometimes, but then it gets more difficult and you get into trauma. For most people, they're going into painful childhood trauma. People with bipolar disorder are traumatized. A lot of them have been sexually abused, and it's underreported, completely underreported. So then once all of this is processed, people can have an unusual feeling, because when people think of a spiritual experience, they think of a mountaintop experience, like a Tony Robbins weekend. Oh man, now I'm the greatest and I'm going to go out and make $1 million company. Right. But like, for example, after my 10-day retreat, most people feel more like they're exhausted and they've had the rug pulled out from under them and they're just landed on their ass and they don't know which way to go. That's how they usually end the retreat, a little disoriented and a little bit shaken, because our ego has not caught up to what happened. The ego is just like, what the hell just happened to me here? But then give it a few months and things start to catch up and life gets lighter and certain issues have dissipated and people start to feel more open, spontaneous, relaxed, and peaceful. And that's the general direction of the work. And the disorder gets milder and maybe goes away completely.
And they have practices to go home with to continue the work and things of that nature, right?
We give them integration work, but in terms of doing breath work, until now, it's not something that anybody's been able to do on their own. Okay. You need to have a trained facilitator with you, right? But recently, and it has not been successful, but I have put up a online training program where I'm ready to try and coach people in an online way if they have a supporter who's prepared to do the training with them. Haven't had any takers. If anyone out there wants to try bipolar breath work and they've got a supporter, you can sign up at my on my website, and we can try it from an online perspective. And yeah, the reason is that people can lose, when you overbreathe like that, people can lose pain reception in like their hands and feet. And if they get angry and they want to start to kick and stuff, they could break a hand on a hard surface or something like that.
Okay.
And they could also get into some scary place where they might project their experience, which is kind of like a mini version of paranoia, which if you've got a facilitator with you, that's cool. But if you're alone, you could end up doing something stupid. So you really need that protection of a present person who's really present and knows what they're doing.
Thank you for stating that and making people aware in case they think they can handle it alone.
Yeah, you can't, and good luck, but you can. And somebody's going to try. They're going to be like, I don't need a facilitator. And they're going to go down, and then they're going to be like, fuck, what's that? Okay, I'm never touching that again. It's like, that's the point, is that now you're scared. Now you're not going to go for it. You think you've done holotropic breath work, and you haven't. You've done your own dumbass style, and it's not going to work. So get somebody with you who knows what they're doing.
Fair point. Thank you. For those people listening that have had terrifying manic or psychotic episodes, how do you help them hold those experiences as potential meaningful or healing without the risk of any suffering involved?
Right. That's an excellent question. Before somebody works with me, I want to take an evaluation from them and see what the nature of their non-ordinary state experiences is like. If it is primarily spiritual and they recognize that there's something going on with them internally, then we're in good shape. Then I can work with that. But if it's primarily paranoid and they see it as external forces coming at them in a paranoid way, like the CIA is after me and that kind of thing, what you're dealing with there is projected fear. They've taken what's fearful inside of them and they've externalized it. They see it as happening to them, not something going on within them. So part of my job as a therapist is to ensure that people have a capacity to internalize what they're going through and to internalize that content and to see how fearful it is. Because if the content tends to be very fearful and externalized, I'm not in a position right now to work with somebody like that. There is potential there, but it's a longer road. And for example, when I do a 10-day retreat with people, I need to hit the ground running. I can't deal with someone who's got trust issues on day one, building their trust for 5 days until we can finally get to a breathwork session. It would be a waste of their money. So I want to make sure it's a good investment. Now, with that said, I am doing some distance work now where I'm pretty much ready to work with anybody who's ready to work with me, But even that work, if you have that paranoid mindset, even the idea of me helping them at a distance might freak them out.
You've adopted holotropic breathwork, so we can continue on a little bit with that into something specific for people with bipolar diagnosis. What do you have to change or add to make this work safe and ethical for such a vulnerable population? Honestly, that sounds redundant. I mean, you've gone into that. I don't know if you want to expand on it.
Yeah,
I can edit.
I talked about the retreat process already, that I've created
Yeah.
that. That gives them an unlimited time frame to be with, right?
Yeah.
And also they can stop and start whenever they want. They can really control the process. When you're in a holotropic breathwork group, they're going to really push you to stay in there for that 3 hours. But I think that's too much to do for people with a deeper disorder. I want them to follow their rhythm and really lead that way.
One of the more controversial parts of your work is surrogate breathwork. Where do you take on aspects of a client's trauma in your own process, and what safeguards do you have in place so that this doesn't become a burnout for you?
Right. Great question. And this is where my work goes from like, okay, holotropic breathwork was like this clinical practice developed by Stan Grof. And then things got weird. Okay. Because what happened was I'm on retreats, doing retreats with people. I'm doing pretty much a holotropic breathwork style, except they can stop whenever they want. They've got my full attention, and that made it bipolar breathwork. But I'm getting exhausted after 2 or 3 days being with this person, and I'm having nightmares that appear to be related to the content of what they're going through. So, for example, I was working with a client where I felt like she was working with a lot of fear, going through fear in her sessions. And at night, I dream that my wife and I are in a hotel corridor and she's being dragged down the corridor by a lion. And I'm calling my parents in terror from a hotel room saying, please save us. This is not my standard dream. And this was happening with all of my clients. And I was feeling like my body was covered in charcoal and I was just wiped out. And I eventually got to the point where I realized that I needed to do breath work on behalf of the client. And from my training, which was with Grof transpersonal training, that is heresy, because the whole point of holotropic breathwork was you are working on your own healing, following the guidance of your own inner healer, right? Then all of a sudden my work unfolds and it's like, guess what? That inner healer, it's a field. It's not just working with you. That field knows who's in the room, knows who's empathetic, and can direct some of that unconscious content from that one client to other people in the room who can handle it. And that was a big breakthrough. And it took it, I developed it with also the help of Monica Kettler, she was my second client who became a supporter for other clients. And the first experiments I had, because I needed to facilitate, but Moni was in tears from supporting the clients. She was just in tremendous pain from supporting clients because she was a surrogate as well. She was absorbing some of this energy. So one day we were both so spent, right? Moni and I were both so spent that we gave it a day, and 4 days into our retreat, we just went to a water park. Me, her, the client, Tim, his girlfriend, the supporter, Lara, and we all went to the water park, got a little space. And then when I came back, I said, okay, how about Moni? You breathe with Tim, right? And then next thing you know, Tim's having this very quiet session. Moni's going crazy. She's on the mat, like this kind of thing. And one thing that was really funny in this first experiment was in the middle of the session, Tim had to go to the bathroom. Okay, so the music's playing. Moni's in this turmoil. Tim needs to go to the bathroom. I take Tim to go to the bathroom. When the session was over, he came back. He goes back into his process. When the session was over, Moni said to me, what happened halfway during Tim's session? I said, we went up and went to the bathroom. She says, oh, that's what happened. And I said, why? She says, because I'm in this turmoil. I'm working through things like crazy. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And I didn't know what's going on because her eyes are closed. And then he came back to the mat. Oh, there it is again. Oh, okay. And then the way she goes, So it's incredible. It's a quantum field action happening. And this was the beginning of the surrogate work. And then eventually we realized that, and I realized that you could do this work at a distance for people because this quantum dimension has no time and no space. So I do distance healing work now, doing this surrogate breathwork style. And I call it distance surrogate breathwork. And I work with people in Australia and Finland and the United States and all over the place. And it just comes every single time. And it's been very consistent. And it's a way to make the retreat process a whole lot cheaper.
For someone...
It's very woo-woo.
Go ahead. Yeah, I got to tell Angie about that. For someone currently living with a bipolar diagnosis who feels drawn to a more spiritual or trauma-based understanding, what are grounded first steps that they can take without abruptly abandoning their current treatment?
Great. I'm giving you props for your questions. You're asking great questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, in the beginning, my website was called Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? And then I changed the name to Bipolar Awakenings. Because most of the people who would contact me, they would say, what's wrong with me? What am I going through here? Is it a spiritual experience? Because I'm having spiritual experiences. Or is it a mental illness? And in their head, they're thinking, if it's spiritual, I don't need the meds. If it's a mental illness, I do need the meds. So which is it? And it took me years to really get to the bottom of it, that it's both. It's this overlap. And so that's why I call it a bipolar awakening, right? I say you're having a bipolar awakening, which means it has the potential to be a breakthrough and really change your life for the better. Really, like turn your life upside down. Monica Kettler, who I mentioned, is now a licensed therapist in Germany, and she works with people with bipolar disorder. She was my second client, incredible breakthrough. On the other hand, if you don't do anything to work towards your healing, or you go about your healing in stupid ways, like just deciding, well, whatever, just doing whatever you want to do is the thing you need to do. Like, oh, I'm going to heal my bipolar disorder by smoking lots of weed. That's nonsense. That's never going to work. But if you take a focused approach towards healing your trauma, you're going to be okay. But if you don't, you'll need medication for life.
Yeah.
And the difference I could say is it's the same energy, but are you internalizing it or are you externalizing it? See, which way are you directing that energy? And that's the difference between basically failure and success.
Do you believe in that thing? Well, I don't know if it's been proven or not, but I mean, and it's more stronger now that younger individuals who do, maybe they're going through something or trying to numb their trauma through, using THC, like, does that cause issues in them? I guess, like, in this sort of state, does that kind of put them in that state? Like
Sure.
Yeah.
And I've talked to
Psychosis, I mean, yeah.
I've probably talked to over 1,000 people with bipolar disorder at this point. And the leading triggers, and funny enough, how they come out, mind-altering substances, specifically heavy marijuana use is number one, psychedelic use number two, but you'll never guess what number three and number four are. I would say,
Alcohol?
no. International travel would
Really?
probably be number three, and intensive meditation, like going on a meditation retreat. Now, you wouldn't think, like, how are these things, like international travel is wonderful, intensive meditation retreat, congratulations, right?
Mhm.
We tend to think of, but what those things are doing, all four are doing the same thing. They're breaking down your ego in different ways, okay? So for example, if you travel to India and you wake up in the morning and you don't have your Wheaties and your orange juice and your toast, and you got, I don't know what they serve for breakfast in India, but you got something completely different. That shakes your ego on a level where you're like, what am I doing I'm eating rice for breakfast. There's something in your ego that goes, I don't like this. This is wrong. It wants what it knows as reality, and culture is reality. So as we break down our understandings of reality through culture, that also breaks down our ego, right? Meditation retreats are all about breaking down the ego, but a lot of people go into psychosis that way. So those are the big factors. And another big one is when people go away to university, they're leaving home for the first time. They're going into a new program. They're meeting people from maybe cities or states they've never met before, people with different ideas. And they're not the star student anymore either. All of a sudden those straight A's become C's and D's. Huge ego shift. And then you throw the weed on top of that you get in university. And that's like the magic formula for acute psychosis. And they do have, related to the drugs, they do have plenty of research now showing that heavy marijuana use leads to acute psychosis.
Yeah, it's way more stronger than it was back in the day. Because I'm interested in that. Well, not that. The travel part because, and college-wise, because I have a young son who's my oldest, he's in high school that is catering them to, I guess, college studies. So for something like that, and for young individuals who are in college now who might be listening and they're going through the throes of adjusting, is it safe to say to, I guess, kind of bring them to a state of, I guess, calm, to not have to deal with that, to realize where you're at, to understand that, hey, this is what I'm going through, this is different, and recognize what it is, to rather not be surprised by it, and then it leading to, an episode? Does that help recognizing where you're at and what you're going through rather than just being assaulted by the differences?
Right. Well, and this is where I think we really need total cultural change, complete cultural change in how we address these things. Because, for example, what will happen to a student that has an episode and they've got this episode that takes place in university? First thing that's going to happen, parents are going to get them medicated so they can go back to their university, because their university is their future, right? That's what needs to take place. They've got to have that degree. But what kind of future is it if in the future you end up having repeated episodes where you can't hang on to a job, you can't hang on to a relationship, you can't hang on to anything that requires responsibility, right? If it's my son and he goes into a non-ordinary state experience in university, I take him out of university immediately and I work on his healing 100%. It's like, you don't need to perform anything. You don't need, and I know your friends are going to school and all this stuff, but your priority is your mental health. You need to work through your traumas that are related to this. You need to stop smoking weed. This is a priority, and get the person straight with themselves. And then after that, they could probably make a better informed decision about the kind of education that they want as well. Most of the time when kids are going to university, they don't have much of a sense of themselves. But after doing deep introspective work, you'll be in a much better place, a more mature place in a few years. And then the investment is worth it. But to me, if my son goes into acute psychosis, that $100,000 I'm spending on his education is just burning money.
Well received. You always want to, I have 3 kids, 3 boys, and it's getting to that stage when they get older to make sure they know to understand you. When you walk into a situation, take the temperature of the room, understand where you're going, in a sense of you're meeting different people. It is so positive to meet, eclectic people, understand, but also know yourself, know your limitations, know how you want to grow, and give yourself hopefully a good roadmap to not be enthralled by something that can actually turn your mind to such a state that you're not centered anymore, and then you have to deal with those. Yeah, so that's something that I had to deal with, and I guess that's why I'm so good at podcasting, because I can meet different people, understand what they want to describe to me, what they're going to, what they're leading in, and what their life's work is, without being that type of person that says, oh my God, I'm going to throw myself 100% behind you, and this and that, I believe in what you're doing. And I'm like, no, that's not me. I know people like that. And I just said, like, no, interesting. Like, tell me more about it. Let me know what you're doing. I see your journey, but it's not going to shake mine. And I'm learning something from you. I'm adding to me, and, just keep it pushing and learn,
Yeah.
So,
and new ideas take time,
yep.
It takes time to digest things, but going back to your example of your sons, I had a client of mine who had a 20-year history of schizophrenia. She'd been hospitalized 11 times, although she always refused the meds, but she was hospitalized 11 times. And she came out of our 2 retreats, much better mother. But then she said, look, could you talk to my son? He's getting into a bit of trouble here. And this kid, he was a good kid. I knew him when he was 6 years old. Now he's like 14. And he's hanging out with some kids, and there's a girl he's hanging out with who's 13, and she's already had sex with 3 guys, and he was the third, right? The third of 3 guys. And they were getting into trouble with police. And I was like, man, you are the company you keep. Do you want to be like the people that you're hanging out with? Because you're going to become those people. And you know what? It just took a few conversations with him, and he cleaned up. He stopped hanging out with all these kids, and he went back to his old friends. He just he turned his life right around. 14 years old.
I could imagine if he was holding on to something that was making him feel like he wasn't good enough, and, having that sort of like discussion and say, hey, look, like how you said, it's, be better than what you are and the people around you. And, yes, keep company of better people, but also be a shining example. And a child is not going to know how to do that unless they get guidance. And I'm sure you've probably given as much as you could to say, hey, look, you gotta understand what you're doing to yourself.
Yeah. But the part that amazed me was that he listened.
That's perfect.
I'm like, what 14-year-old kid's going to listen to me? None, but he did, he did.
It might be because he wasn't your kid. That's why, so.
Yeah. He needed to hear it from someone other than his mother, I think.
Yep. That's one of the hard things as a parent to deal with. And because I never received that well from my father, because one of the things, and it's a strong statement to say that, like, I hated hearing it, was that, he would repeat when I was younger, he's like, oh, no, I'm not your father, I'm your friend. Like, fuck that. I need a father. I don't need a friend.
Yeah.
I got friends.
Yeah.
So older and being able to process that, especially as a father, I tell my kids, it's like, I love you. I'll live for you. I'll die for you. I'll drop anything, anyone, for you, and understand that it's like, you can never, because what I kind of see is like my oldest, he goes a lot to his mom. So they have a great relationship, and I love that. But I notice is that when he's in a predicament, I get that phone call, and he's like, more recently he was like, he likes to do what I do. He goes out for a walk. He went out for a walk. Sun was about to go down. He was in a spot where lighting wasn't good. It was dark. He couldn't get back the way he was. He calls me and he's like, Dad, I'm kind of scared. I don't know how to get home. The route that I went to be in this place, I can't access that anymore because they closed, and I don't know what to do, and I need to get home. I'm like, I was around a whole bunch of people. We had friends who were doing a seminar. I ignored everybody. I ran outside. I'm like, I told my wife, something's going on. I'll let you know on the road. And I told them, I said, look, I'm going to coach you through this. So you know, if this happens again, this is what you do. So pay attention. Drop me a pin. Where you going? I said, we're going to talk while I'm on the way over there. I was about 20 minutes away. I was doing like 80, 90 on the highway, because when you're a parent and your child tells you, hey, I'm scared. I could have been a Formula One racer. I was zipping in and out, got to him, but I was telling him while I was driving, I was like, drop a pin. I said, you know what? If you're really scared, we don't live in a bad neighborhood. I said, but movement is life. You gotta move. He was gonna sit down, tell me where he was, and wait for me to come pick him up. No, show me where you are. I'll tell you where to go. He dropped me a pin. I said, I know exactly where you are. You still have light. You got about 20 minutes worth of light. Get your ass going. Go this way and be there. You're going to be in a more well-lit area. By the time you get there, most likely I'll show up and I'll pick you up. But do not stay there. If you're worried, start moving. Gave him a direction. I said, dude, you got a smartphone in your hands. Open up Google Maps. Open up the walking directions. You want to get home? Let's go. And just doing that and not being the type of parent to say, what the hell is wrong with you? Why you keep doing this? You don't understand what you can't figure this out. I'm like, no, I turn into the most guidingest parent you can probably be. And as soon as he tells me, he's like, oh, pulling up and I'm walking up in front of the spot. I'm pulling up on the road, pick him up. Let's go. Buddy, you did a great job. Da, 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 gave him the encouragement. And you can see like the same tone that he called me with, gone. Mm-hmm. And walking him through that. So it's like, I said, look, just be more careful, this and that, giving him the little warning taps, like, do that and you're going to be okay. And if it was any other sort of situation, trust me, he's like, yeah, but you had to leave. I said, don't worry about that. Anything I'm doing is not even secondary. It's like bottom of the list to you guys. And then that comforts a child to know that, oh, shit, like, okay, I wiped his ass from a baby till God knows when. And then, he would still think, well, I don't know, Dad's not, really vibing with me or whatever. Like, dude, man, I'm not just there to save you, but I'm a parent. And so we had a good conversation. And
they do need to learn how to wipe their own ass eventually, though.
And he does. But it's like, and that's, and they all hold a special place, but he's my firstborn. So it's like, no, everybody was like looking at me with leaving. Like, why is he saying goodbye? I'm like, if you knew. And then that kind of helps me want to change the perspective of people with my podcast to understand that don't tell yourself something about what someone else is doing, because someone could have been like, oh, like he's rude. Why is he leaving without saying goodbye? And change that perception so that it doesn't chip away at how you're thinking, doesn't chip away at your self-worth. Instead of saying, oh, I know this person, he's a good guy, and if he's leaving, then, without saying goodbye, something may have happened.
He's a New Yorker. You need to understand.
Thank you for the bias. I got nice.
New Jersey. He's from New Jersey. Newark. He's from Newark. Okay, there was a slight there. It's true. But you guys are not known as being the most, don't forget I'm Canadian, right? We say sorry the second we walk out the door. So it's a little different.
Hey, look, at least now you're Canadian and, in Brazil next to a beach. So I could imagine how more nicer you are now.
Well, they're very friendly here. They're not honest, but they're very friendly.
So, we're almost done here. What kind of conversations would you love to have happen between people like yourself who work in altered states and mainstream psychiatry if those worlds were willing to sit at the same table?
Yes, I suppose the same kind of conversation I'm having with you right now, I guess the difference, though, is that there's not a lot of open psychiatrists, right? I mean, it's getting better, but it's not that open. And I'd love to sit down with psychiatrists and first get it on the table. Like, let's face it, there's no science behind what you guys are doing. Just open yourself up to admitting that. If you can't admit that, then we got no place to go, because it's kind of like arguing whether Trump attacked Jan 6th the Capitol or not. Like, if you can't agree on the facts, you can't have a conversation, It's that kind of thing. So, but if we can agree on facts that, okay, this is the truth about certain things, okay, then we can talk. And, I've been to a psychiatric nursing conference in Riga, Latvia, and people go to those conferences because they're interested in new ideas. That's why they go to conferences. And I gave up and I gave my little show with my client from Finland who had the son, the one with the 20-year history, 12 minutes, and we just blew them away. They loved it. They loved what we had to say, So if you come from an open heart, and also to let psychiatry know that I'm not against psychiatry. People need to function. They need psychiatric meds in a lot of situations. Some will need meds for life. And that my work, even in the retreats and that kind of thing, I suggest that people remain on their medication until even their psychiatrist can recognize that there's a shift. For example, people can become excessively drowsy and lacking energy because my work will take them to a place where they're over-medicated, and that's a sign of being over-medicated. So you could go back to your therapist or your psychiatrist and say, can we just reduce my meds a bit because I'm really feeling draggy? And the psychiatrist will go along with that. And they're in a situation where they need to protect people's survival. If someone goes out the door and kills themselves because the psychiatrist didn't medicate, then that psychiatrist is liable. So I have more compassion, understanding for this position of the psychiatrist, and appreciation for the position of the psychiatrist now than I did when I started. I started kind of from an anti-psychiatry position. But 2 years ago, when I was in New Jersey, I went to a conference put on by the Department of Psychiatry at Rutgers University on psychosis and spirituality. So this was psychiatry looking at spirituality for the first time that I'm aware of. And I actually met the president. It was a brief meeting, but I met the president of the American Psychiatric Association, got to shake his hand. Petros Livonis, his name is. And just being in that room was like, wow, this wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, Now, they're at the baby step stage. I mean, they're not ready for what I've got to share, but they're looking at it. That's the difference.
Have you had any approach you to say, okay, I want to try what you do at your retreats just to check the validity and maybe just have an experience, if at all? Has that ever happened?
Well, I've got 3 dreams for my work. Okay. First is to have it endorsed by psychiatry. The second is to have my clients doing the therapeutic work instead of me, so that they can go out and be therapists themselves. People who have bipolar disorder are becoming therapists, right? And then the third is to work with a few famous people that have a few bucks because they've got connections, and I can finally, live with a little bit of financial security, because at this point, I'm not. All of that came together in September. The director, one of my former clients who now works as a peer support person in the psychiatric work in the Netherlands, he had talked to his lead psychiatrist, the director of a university of psychiatry, about my work. I don't want to give names because there's privacy involved, right?
Understood.
But I had met this guy at a conference as well. So this particular psychiatrist knew me personally. He'd actually introduced me at a conference there. So this psychiatrist contacted my client about doing a retreat for a famous retired soccer player from the Netherlands, a guy who'd been on the team, the World Cup team, for a decade, and he was retired now. So I was like, famous person on a retreat with my clients being the therapist, recommended by psychiatry. This was it for me. This was what I've been working for. Now, in many ways, it was a dream come true to just have that come forward. And I think to a certain degree, it's the event that my work needed to come out into this podcast world and say, look, this is happening. It's real. My work is being endorsed by psychiatry. It's being done by my former clients. This is a big deal.
And that's awesome. Now, when you think about the next 5 to 10 years, what is in your honest hope of how society talks about bipolar disorder, spiritual emergence, and non-ordinary states of consciousness?
My dream is that in 10 years, we'll put it in 10 years, people are bragging about their kids who've got bipolar. They're like, well, my son's bipolar. And then immediately people know that these are empathic kids who have contact with an inherent spiritual dimension. And then if they do their own healing work, then they have the capacity to heal other people. So they're kind of like healers in the making, you might say. All of a sudden, what has been something frowned upon by society, you're considered broken, you're considered put at the side, and then it becomes a status symbol. That would be the bigger vision. But I see that as something that is at least 10 years away. 5 years from now, I would like to see my work being done, or even next year, I would like to see my work being done on a regular basis in an institution. And particularly, I think the Netherlands is well suited to that. I think the connections I've got there and the culture around, they're very good in the Netherlands at wanting to try new ideas, but coming at the ideas in a very objective way. They know how to disagree respectfully, which is something that some people in other countries don't know how to do, right? They're very good at it. And that's a great environment for bringing up my work. And I've spent a lot of time there.
Finally, for listeners who resonated with this but are weary to hope for healing, what would you want them to hold on to after this conversation? And where can they go to learn more about your book, your videos, and your offerings?
All right. If someone's got bipolar disorder in their family, or they've got bipolar disorder and they're listening to the podcast, or other related disorders, schizoaffective, depression, possibly schizophrenia. What I'm saying can sound like a bomb, like, oh my God, this guy just blew my mind. He's saying everything that I've already been thinking myself, that nobody believes me, and it's just like this huge thing. Take a breath. Don't go off your medications. Sit down. It's going to be a healing. It's going to be a journey. It's going to be a path. You can learn about my work through my website, bipolarawakenings.com. And both my books, I'll put it up again, are available as free PDFs or on Amazon. Okay, you can buy them on Amazon, and the access to both books are on my website. You can book a free consultation with me if you're interested. A free 30-minute consultation, and I have a free training program there as well. And those are the best videos for you to take a look at. There's one program there I call the Light program. It's only 4 hours long. The more intensive program, which actually puts you in a position where you could be working with others in the future, that's an 8-hour program. Talks about the more theoretical side as well. So that's it, bipolarawakenings.com. I'll see you there.
I'll make sure to put the link in the post, and great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. It's been a pleasure.
If you're here at the end of our conversation, pace your next steps. Because what Stephanie shared wasn't just design talk. It was a reminder that healing doesn't always begin in your mind. Sometimes it begins in the personal spaces around you. Her story, from the starving artist years to discovering holistic healing, to realizing that safety and nervous system peace are the foundation of human growth, shows us something powerful. Your environment is either supporting your life or it's silently sabotaging it. When she spoke about neurodivergent families, about parents who had given up their boundaries, about children who need agency and adults who need to feel like themselves again, she wasn't just talking about design. She was talking about dignity, about identity, about the subtle ways we lose ourselves inside spaces that overwhelm us, and the quiet miracles that happen when we reclaim said spaces. And if anything you heard today made you look around your own home differently, good. Because you deserve a space that reflects your story, your culture, your nervous system, and your peace. You deserve a sanctuary. Not someday, not when your life gets easier, but starting with one small daily shift starting today. So take Stephanie's advice. Find the one object, color, texture, or memory in your space that makes you feel good, and give it room to breathe. Let that be the first step in rebuilding your environment, and maybe even rebuilding yourself. Until next time, keep choosing spaces that love you back. This is FYI, I am damaged. If you're still here, take a nice slow deep breath, because what Sean shared today wasn't just a story. It was an invitation to rethink the labels we give ourselves, the experiences we fear, and the parts of our lives we were taught to hide. Sean reminds us that not every overwhelming moment is a malfunction. Sometimes it's a reorganization. Sometimes it's trauma trying to surface so it can leave. Sometimes it's your inner world asking for a little more compassion and a little less panic. And he showed us something even more helpful. Healing is possible, even for people who've been told their whole lives that it isn't. And he showed us something even more hopeful. Healing is possible, even for people who've been told their whole lives that it isn't. whether it's through breathwork therapy, community, or simply learning how to be curious instead of afraid. There are paths forward, real ones. But maybe Sean's biggest message is this. You don't have to choose between science and spirituality, between medication and meaning, between surviving and awakening. You can hold both. You can be both. You can heal while still honoring the mystery of who you are becoming. So if today's episode sparks something in you, hope, relief, curiosity, or even quiet, wait, that sounds like me, hold on to that. Healing is not instant, but it is absolutely possible. Adelante, siempre por tu mente. Forward, always for your mind. This is the FYI I Am Damaged podcast. Meet Logan, the strong-minded little elephant who learns that bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about believing in yourself even when you're scared. In this beautifully illustrated story, friends follow Logan through a colorful jungle as he learns to calm his worries, take deep breaths, and remind himself, I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. It's a story that helps kids, and maybe a few grown-ups too, find courage, mindfulness, and strengthen their hearts. Logan, the strong-minded little elephant, by me, Oscar Luna. Available now at all major retailers and my publisher's bookstore, Milton and Hugo. Because it's up to every parent to show that their child deserves to know that strength starts from within.